Have you been told that the only way for you to get ahead is to work your ass off? If you wake up earlier, if you outcompete your coworkers, if you sacrifice your time, your body, and your life for capitalism, then and only then will you be rewarded with a big house, a fancy car, and a blinged out coffin when you die, right? Wrong. All of that is bullshit. But for most people, that compete to get ahead, grind till you die work ethic doesn't guarantee you a better life. It just makes the boss richer at your expense. The truth is, the only way average people have ever gained economic security and prosperity is by refusing to work. Now, I realize I'm picking a fight with a big chunk of the internet here. Pop open Instagram and you'll be flooded with posts from accounts with names like Billionaire Bezos Grind Set, writing such drivel as grind while they rest, study while they party, and you'll live like they dream. But if grinding your knob off is really the way to improve your lot in life, tell me this. Why is it that Americans work hundreds of hours more every year than workers in other countries, but we have one of the highest poverty rates in the world? Why is it that worker productivity has skyrocketed since 1980, and yet our wages have stayed flat? And why is it that at a time when we have record low unemployment, with more people working more than ever, so many Americans can't afford basic necessities like housing or medical care? Well, it's because that work hard, grind till you die ethos is one big myth designed to trick us into believing that if we work just a little harder, sacrifice just a little more, we too can become billionaires. But it's a lie. I mean, if you just think about it for a second, it's blindingly obvious that billionaires like Jeff Bezos did not earn their billions by working harder than everyone else, because it's not actually possible to work billions of times harder than another person. I mean, there are only 24 hours in the day. In fact, he probably works less, because Bezos famously spends most of his morning doing what he calls puttering. That's right, puttering. Then saunters into his first meeting at the leisurely hour of 10 a.m. And to be clear, that all sounds great. We should all be so lucky as to get to spend the morning dicking around in a bathrobe. But you know who's already been rising and grinding for 6 hours by the time Jeff finishes the Wordle? The everyday people who work in his warehouses. The truth is, billionaires like Bezos actually got rich because they figured out how to squeeze work out of other people, pay them peanuts, then keep the profits for themselves. Jeff's warehouse employees are forced to endure such long and grueling hours that OSHA warns working for Amazon could give you a musculoskeletal disorder. But you know what? In exchange for sacrificing their health and well-being so boss baby Bezos can bank another bill, do those workers get paid a portion of the profits? No, they get burned up and thrown out. The turnover rate in Amazon warehouses is 150% a year. That's right, Amazon literally churns through their entire workforce in under 8 months. I'm giving real-life Lex Luthor here a hard time, but the truth is, this is how every company in America sees its workers. It's right in the name of the department, human resources. You're just another resource to them to extract and convert into revenue as cheaply as possible. You're not a person. You're literally fuel. In fact, you're better than fuel because unlike gasoline or coal or electricity, they control the price of your labor. You're a soft cost. And if they can threaten, trick, or coerce you into doing more work for less wages, then their costs go down and their profits go up. So come on. You think hard work is going to impress the bosses and make them give you a raise? Please. You're literally worth more to them the less they pay you. That means we live under a system where no matter how hard you work, you still may not be able to afford the basic necessities of life because some motherfucker on top is keeping all the profits of your labor for himself. And if you complain about it, well, too bad, because our toxic hustle culture has convinced everyone that if you can't pay the bills, it's your own lazy fault. So what the fuck do we do about it? Simple. The same thing we did the last time this happened. So the Industrial Revolution was kind of fucked up. Work moved from the farm or the home, where people could labor at their own pace, into the factory, where they were forced to work back-breaking hours under abominable conditions. Workers back then were treated even worse than we are today, and the companies that abused and exploited them were even more powerful. And yet somehow, these workers banded together, kicked the capitalists' asses, and won every workplace protection we now take for granted. And they didn't do it by working harder or getting on their grind. They did it by collectively refusing to work. I really can't overstate how horrifying working conditions were during the late 19th century. People were made to work 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. Children worked side by side with adults, and the bosses literally worked them all to death. In the cotton mills, girls were inhaling particles and vomiting onto the mill floor. In the mines, boys as young as 10 were getting crushed in coal chutes, and factories were straight up exploding like all the damn time. Most famously, at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York, the low-wage, mostly immigrant workforce had to meet such high quotas that they weren't even allowed to go to the bathroom when they wanted. Huh, does that remind you of anyone, Jeff? In fact, the doors were routinely locked from the outside. So when on March 25th, 1911, a fire broke out, the women and girls who worked at the factory were unable to escape and were forced to jump out of 10th-story windows. 146 people died. Tragedies like these were so traumatic, so gruesome, and so utterly common that workers had no choice but to fight back. First, they begged for change. Then they pleaded. So when asking nicely failed, the workers began to organize. See, individually, the average person doesn't have the power to stand up to a billionaire capitalist, but when they act together, workers gain power, kind of like a Gilded Age version of Voltron. These workers formed into unions, democratic organizations dedicated to fighting for the rights of their members, and their weapon was the strike, or the collective withholding of their labor. See, even though the bosses at the top tell us that they're the ones doing the big capitalism, so they deserve the big bucks, in reality, it's the labor of the workers that actually generates their profits. So when the workers say collectively, nah, you know what? We're not interested in dying in your black lung death trap, pass, they turn off the money tap. And when confronted with this potent new weapon, you know what the bosses did? They sent armed militias to murder them. When the Great Railroad Strike began in 1877, state militias killed 10 workers in bloody clashes. In 1897, 19 striking coal miners were killed by police. And in 1914, the Colorado National Guard murdered more than 20 strikers, including 11 children. But you know, the workers had a choice. They could die in the coal mines and the factories, or they could die fighting for a better life. And that really was no choice at all. So they stood strong. Despite the violence leveled against them, by 1935, union membership had grown so dramatically that the labor movement became a powerful force in U.S. politics, and workers forced Congress to pass the Wagner Act, which for the first time federally guaranteed that they had the right to organize into a union, and that once they did, the company was required to bargain with them. With that, the days of sending militias to bust up unions were over, and instead, the workers started kicking corporate ass. They began unionizing across America, going up against and taking down the most powerful corporations on earth. In the 1930s, General Motors was even bigger, more powerful, and more exploitative than Amazon is today. But the workers at GM's Body Plant 1 literally seized the means of production by sitting down on the job and refusing to work or leave the factory until they got what they wanted. They even wrote songs to keep their spirits up.
Sit down, just keep your feet. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down, you gotta be. Sit down, sit down.
After 44 days of total shutdown, General Motors bent the knee and recognized their workers' union. The sit-down strike turned out to be such a powerful weapon that just a few days later, Big Steel recognized the Steel Workers Union and agreed not just to pay hikes, but an 8-hour day, a 40-hour work week, and time and a half for overtime. You know, just the baseline workplace protections we all take for granted today. Turns out they weren't gifted to us by benevolent billionaires. They were won by brave workers who took radical action to halt the wheels of industry until they got what they demanded. And many of them literally sacrificed their lives so the rest of us could live free from exploitation. And let's be clear, these workers succeeded beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The era of mass unionization also brought about the largest reduction in inequality in the history of this country. That means the labor movement literally created the American middle class. When you think back to the good old days, the kind of solid American job your grandparent might have had, where an honest day's work earned you a house, college savings for your kid, and a pension plan for your retirement, you're thinking of a union job. Hell, even non-union workers benefited because the union jobs were so good, other companies needed to step up their benefits to attract workers. I mean, think about this. Some of the most exploited and disenfranchised people in America forced the titans of industry to bend to their will just by organizing, sticking together, and insisting on their common dignity. And in so doing, they made life better for all of us. And with that, an era of labor peace fell across the... You fool. Did you really think corporate America was just going to lie down and let those puny wage slaves win? Of course not. The capitalists never stopped hating the unions. Instead, they spent the next 70 years executing a master plan to weaken and destroy the labor movement and the prosperity that came with it. Less than 10 years after the passage of the Wagner Act, the forces of business lobbied Congress to pass the first anti-labor law, the Taft-Hartley Act, which made many types of strikes illegal. When workers fought back against the dozens of anti-labor laws that followed, the Supreme Court sided with the bosses over and over again. As a result of this onslaught, by the 70s, membership in unions had already begun to decline. But the masterstroke came in 1981, when 11,000 air traffic controllers went on strike, and President Ronald Reagan responded by firing them. Oh yes, Reagan was the great communicator, and what he communicated to workers was go fuck yourself. This move signaled that the government was no longer on labor's side, and that the capitalists were free to drive their boot into workers' faces over and over again. And they did with the help of a secret weapon. Money. They have a shitload of money. Today, instead of paying their workers fair wages, American employers spend around $433 million a year on consultants that advise them how to avoid and squash unions. Why? Because they view their own workers as a threat. And I know that because Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz literally said so in front of a live audience.
We can't ignore what is happening in the country as it relates to companies throughout the country being assaulted in many ways by the threat of unionization.
This mother frother is so terrified of his own baristas that when Starbucks workers started organizing, the company interfered in union elections, fired workers and closed stores just because they went union, and even started an anti-union propaganda website full of bullshit claims like, if you join a union, your compensation could actually go down. It will not happen because union workers make 10% more on average than non-union workers in the same field. But if you really want some blatantly anti-union bullshit, Amazon delivers. They've forced workers to sit in captive audience meetings where they literally threaten to cut wages and even close the entire warehouse if the workers vote for a union. One union said that Amazon even paid local police to sit outside the warehouse and harass union organizers. And they were actually forced to rerun a union election because the NLRB found that Amazon illegally intimidated workers into voting no. Over the past decades, corporate America has spent billions on tactics like these, even though many of them are literally illegal. But they get away with it because every president, from Reagan to Barack Obama, has stood idly by and done nothing while the bosses waged warfare on the working class. And what have been the results? Well, exactly what you'd expect. The number of strikes has plummeted. Union membership has hit record lows. And remember how unions massively reduced income inequality? Well, guess what fucking happened there? So why is it that you, the average worker, can no longer buy a house or send your kid to college no matter how hard you work? This is why. Unions created the American middle class, but then the capitalists decided to murder it. They waged a half-century-long campaign against us, their own workers, just because they wanted to keep more of the profits for themselves. They destroyed the one institution that fought on our sides instead of theirs. And then they lied to us and told us that it's our fault because we don't work hard enough. And you know what the most fucked up part is? A lot of us bought it. Because we don't teach the real history of labor in this country, we've forgotten, as a working people, what it is like to fight together and win. Without a better, truer story to turn to, we believed the propaganda that the only way to get ahead is to compete with the worker next to you, that the true heroes of the American economy are the billionaires who exploit us, and that if we just sacrifice as much of our short time on earth to capitalism as possible, we might be rewarded too. All we know is hustle. And now we're hustling ourselves to death. You know, when you hear this story, it's easy to feel hopeless, isn't it? I mean, a mass movement of workers rose up, waged a revolutionary struggle, and changed America for the better. And then they were crushed, and those gains reversed. How are we supposed to fight back against an adversary who's capable of that? One that spends billions to keep us down, that has the government on their side, and that literally signs our paychecks. Well, let's start with this question. Why did they do it? Seriously, ask yourself, if the capitalists hate us so much, why did they spend all that time, all those billions, just to fuck us over? Why didn't they just get rid of us? Replace us, or do the work themselves? Why keep us around at all? It's because they need us. That's why. I mean, think about it. They've been openly fantasizing, threatening for decades to replace us with overseas workers or with robots or now with AI and leave us all to starve. So why don't they fucking do it? In fact, the last time I checked, they were all complaining that they can't hire enough workers, that no one wants to work anymore. It's because they need us. No matter how much they try to fuck us over, gaslight and disempower us, capitalism needs us and our labor to function. And because they need us, we have power. That is what the workers of a century ago knew. And after decades of being squeezed dry by those in power, the workers have started fighting back. A wave of labor actions is sweeping across this country, and the workers are kicking fucking ass. Remember how Starbucks spends millions to grind down its own employees? Well, it didn't work. So far, the Starbucks Workers Union has organized 350 stores. Amazon warehouse workers have unionized too. UPS workers just won a huge new contract by threatening to strike. And auto workers just declared a strike against the big three automakers, shutting down one of the largest industries in America to demand fairer wages and benefits. And you know, I cannot emphasize strongly enough how powerful an experience it is to fight alongside your coworkers like that and win. I know because it happened to me. Over the past few years, the people who run my industry, the TV and movie industry, have done what capitalists do. They've squeezed us, the writers and actors who actually make their product, until many of us couldn't make a living anymore. So my union, the Writers Guild of America, fought back. We held meetings. We shared our stories. We debated strategy, and we decided what demands we were willing to fight for. I went to so many of these meetings that I ended up on the union's board and the negotiating committee, which means I was sitting across the table from the bosses and witnessed the cold, implacable face of capitalism firsthand when we told them what our members desperately needed: to pay our rent and to care for our families. And they replied over and over again, no, no, no. So we did what unions do. We put it to a vote, and we voted in record numbers to authorize a strike. The day we put down our pencils and took to the picket lines, we shut down the entire industry. We ground the wheels of commerce to a halt, and we told the companies we would not leave the picket line, that they would not get a single show or movie made until they negotiated with us over our demands. A few months later, SAG-AFTRA, the performers union, went on strike too, and actors joined the picket line, massively adding to our collective leverage. And after 148 days of picketing, of shared sacrifice and community and laughter and tears, you know what happened? We fucking won. All those proposals they told us at the beginning were too expensive, that they'd never consider in a million years, they gave on them. And we won a contract that will secure our careers and protect writers for decades to come. And that has been, simply put, one of the most powerful experiences of my life. We saw a problem that needed fixing, a system that was fundamentally fucked up and hurting people. But we didn't just complain about it. We didn't just vote or beg a politician to help. No, we did something about it ourselves. We organized collectively. We marshaled our power and we forced the motherfuckers on top to do what we demanded because they had no other choice. We walked back and forth on the sidewalk with signs and we changed the fucking world. And that is incredible. You know, we spend so much of our lives feeling powerless to fix this fucked up world we live in. But a union gives you that power, not to change it everywhere for everyone, but to change it in your community for you and the people around you. I swear to you, this is not fake. It is not bullshit. It is real. I know it because I've done it. And while you might not have much power alone, if you can unite in solidarity with your fellow workers, you can become unstoppable.